were talking last week about they finished the temple, so we got the dedication of the temple now. And we talked about the dimensions of the temple, and I don't know that I saved that. Probably didn't. But you know that the temple was 30 cubits long. It had a 10-cubit porch on the front of it. So just the temple proper, 60 cubits long, was about
a cubit is 18 inches, isn't it?
yeah, about that. But they'll give you, depends on who you listen to. But let's say 18 inches. That's a foot and a half. So you add a half again, so 90 feet long, which means it was about 30 yards. So 30 yards really isn't very long when you look at a football field. You got 100 yards. You got 3 of them stripes. That's how long it was. The holy place was 20. The Holy of Holies was 10. I'm dealing with cubits. So keep that in mind when they start putting the furniture in there. That's what I'm saying, when they start putting that furniture in there. So anyway, in chapter 8, we're told that, and the question was, who did Solomon assemble? And it was the heads of the tribes, and of course the priests and all. But all the elders of Israel, the heads of the tribes, had to be there. Dedication of the temple. And he assembled them to Solomon in Jerusalem to bring up the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, which is in Zion. Now, folks, Zion is Jerusalem.
Yes.
So they're not carrying it, they're not bringing it a long ways. They're just bringing it from the place that it's always been since David brought that tabernacle and set it up in Jerusalem. And he set up Jerusalem as the capital city of the kingdom, and made his kingdom there. So the tabernacle has been there all this time. And now they're transferring everything from the tabernacle into the temple. So they're going to bring the Ark of the Covenant up, which of course it symbolizes the fact that God's made a covenant with them. That's his mercy seat. That's where he sits. And so they assemble themselves to Solomon at the feast. And whatever this feast is, it's a feast that's in the 7th month, which means it's the Feast of the Tabernacles. But so it probably has to do with Passover. Remember, Passover and Pentecost was 40 days after the Passover. And they were supposed to set up their booths, their tents, as tabernacles, and live in tabernacles so they experience and remind themselves of how they traveled through the wilderness in their tabernacles, their tents. And it's part of that feast. If you do your study, and New American Standard does that, I think you'd have to look at, it would have to take you to Chronicles to see that it is the Feast of Tabernacles. Chronicles reminds them of those things, but that's free. I don't want to bore you to tears with study. So, the elders came, the priests took up the ark, and what 3 things did they bring up to the temple? Verse 4.
The holy utensils.
They brought up the ark,
The
the tent. They brought the tabernacle, and all the holy utensils which were in the tent. So evidently they're not, they're going to store this tent. They're saving this tent. Which is interesting to me. We think, we talk sometimes, what happened to the tent after the temple was built? Of course, that's not eternally important or salvically important, so we don't spend a lot of time on it. But they brought the tent up, and evidently they're saving it. They're storing that, bronze serpent that was lifted up in the wilderness that they looked on, you know, they started worshiping that thing, so the priests broke that thing so they wouldn't worship. So, they brought him up, Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who were assembled to him with him before the ark, sacrificing how many sheep, how many oxen, how many sacrifices?
Could not be counted or numbered.
Couldn't even count them all. And the priest brought the Ark of the Covenant to its place in the inner sanctuary. That's the Holy of Holies. And by the way, you know why they call their assembly room sanctuary? That's where they get it from. They get it from the temple. That's the holy place. By the way, so when we go in and sit in the auditorium on Sunday morning, folks, that's the holy place. Well, no it ain't. No it ain't.
That's what the Pentecostals call their assembly room, their sanctuary.
And they're not the only ones. Baptists do call it sanctuary. And churches of Christ, maybe some of them still do, used to.
I never heard it.
Yes, ma'am. That legalistic. The church is the temple of God, and it's the building. And so when we come into the place, we're in the temple. It's not we are the temple. It's the building is the temple. Legalism totally misses all that. Just misses it completely.
Yeah, because that's why they don't want you wearing pants.
Exactly. Yeah. Or any dress that's different from what they want to make their laws, you know.
Yeah.
You know, don't wear shorts. Don't wear pants. Don't wear whatever. That's sad. But notice that they bring the Ark of the Covenant and place it in the inner sanctuary to the most holy place. Where?
Under the wings of the cherubim?
Under the wings of the cherubim. Now, I thought the cherubim were built on top of the lid of the ark.
I thought, yeah, I remember that. Let's see.
Exodus 32 is where we'll go there in a little while, but that may not be where. That's where the molten calf was. So probably have to go further back to that to look at the instructions that God gave them. And by the way, interestingly enough, remember that the Hebrew writer says that they made all these things according to a pattern which God had showed them. A pattern of the real thing. So we read that and we start thinking about that and we think, well, boy, heaven's going to look like that. Figurative language, folks. We've got to know it's figurative language.
What is the real thing that he's talking about? What's the real thing?
The real thing is the actual where God sits, where He is. But does God actually sit on a literal throne? Does He actually sit on a seat?
No, but that's what I'm trying to figure out. What is the real thing? I know it's not a literal seat, but does it have like a?
It's the play. It's the. See, we always will have to put it in place. We have to, we have to physically put it in place. It is the place where we receive, mercy and judgment from God's holy. It is God's holy being, His holy presence. Remember in chapter 4 of Revelation, we see the throne scene, the throne in heaven, one sitting on the throne, the 24 elders, and what else do we see? 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind, one like a lion and a calf and the face of a eagle, and they had 6 wings in the whole process. Literal or figurative? I think it's figurative, and it's hard to deal with that stuff. But y'all just stretch your mind.
But see, and then when I think about it,
make your eyes,
Yeah,
make you be in awe of God.
Yeah.
Wow.
because you never describe anything about a person
Yeah,
in that sense.
exactly.
That's what I was saying. I was trying to think of the word, but
Yeah.
that's what I was saying.
And that's got to be the big picture, That's got to be the big picture. And notice that the cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark. So when Solomon built the temple, you see, go back and look at the instructions again. He built the cherubim stationary at the place where the ark would come and sit underneath the big wing. And the wings of the cherubim in Solomon's temple stretched from one side of the room to the other, and they met in the middle. There's two of them. And here's the ark, and one set of their wings met over the ark, and the other wings reached to the sides of the sanctuary, the wall. And the cherubim made a covering over the ark and its poles from above. But the poles were so long that the ends of the poles could be seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary. But they could not be seen outside. And guess what? They are there to this day.
Yeah, the day that he's writing.
Well, they're not there today
No.
because the temple is long gone and they got a Muslim mosque sitting on the place where the temple was. So it's not today. Now, another thing that was interesting is when you go back to Exodus 25, that's where it talks about the poles. You'll make poles of acacia wood and overlay with gold. This is the tabernacle, y'all, okay, not the temple. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, they shall not be removed from it. Now, I always thought and pictured that the poles, that they would take it inside and then
take the poles out.
but I thought they would turn it.
Turn it with the poles.
And the poles would be parallel to the room, But evidently they take it straight in, and they leave the pole, and they leave the poles, and like you said, I always thought they took the poles out until they got ready to travel it. You think about that. They left it there, but evidently the poles were so long, you see, in holding it, that they poked in the curtain that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, and you could see the poles in the holy place. Of course, you couldn't see them outside, but you could see the poles at the temple. That's interesting.
But when they went off in captivity, those poles got removed from the ark.
Oh yeah, that got destroyed. That whole temple was left, not one stone upon another.
Because when David was bringing the ark back and that guy touched it and he died, God killed him because there was no pole in his hand.
So again, the poles were so long that the ends of the poles could be seen from the holy place before the sanctuary, but not outside, and they are there to this day. Well, the day that the writer wrote this book.
Right.
They're definitely not there in 2013. Now, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone which Moses put there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the sons of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. See, that's what the ark represents. God made a covenant with them, and so the ark and the mercy seat on the ark is a symbol of God dwelling with them.
I thought there was some manna in a container.
Well, there was jars of manna, but
In the ark.
Evidently they, I don't think they ever were inside the ark. They may have been with the ark, or they may have had a, but whatever, up to this point, the writer says only the 2 tablets of stone are there in the ark. Now what did the 2 tablets of stone look like, and how big was that ark? It was very small. Probably wasn't even the size of some of y'all's cedar chests, if you have one.
Yeah.
Probably wasn't even that big.
I like this table.
Yeah, you know, but, so how big were the tablets of stone? Hello, you know, we always imagine those things, you know, Moses comes carrying those two stones down the hill and they're big, you know.
That's what accessible be to me.
And guess what else we imagine? Did y'all know that the two tablets of stone were written on each side, on both sides?
No, you talking about the front and the back?
Front and the back of the stone, did you know that?
That's what Mr. Bill didn't show us.
Well, we talked that in Revelation. We talked about that in Revelation. I think it's 32:15 of Exodus. I think that's where we went a while ago, but when I was trying to look at the dimensions. Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the two tablets of testimony in his hand, tablets which were written on both sides, on front and back. On one side and the other side.
And the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablet. So God personally.
So when you read in the book of Revelation about the scroll being written on both sides, that's the idea. Just like the tablets of stone were written on both sides. This is God's covenant idea. Which is interesting to me when you look at all that. Oh, you know that Bible thing, the Bible? I thought that was junk. I thought it was junk. They had a few.
They had the 10 Commandments on there, it was horrible.
Jesus at the temple was
Well, I'm
junk.
glad you say that because I was going to go buy it.
I thought it was junk.
I hadn't seen it.
Don't buy nothing until you see what you do. Or rent it.
Or rent it.
Rent it, see if you like it first.
Well, you know, sometimes you can buy it cheaper than or as cheap, you know, as you can rent it.
If you waste the money buying it.
Anyway.
It's cheaper to buy it than rent it.
Anyway, so again, you know, he puts all the furniture in the temple. The temple is they're dedicating the temple, and so they're bringing everything. They brought the, what did they bring? They brought the Ark of the Covenant. They brought the tent. They brought the tent. And they brought the utensils that were in the tent, all the stuff that went in. So now they're storing them because Solomon had the table of showbread rebuilt. He built a new, overlaid with gold, big, bright. He made bigger labors. He made better stuff. The sea in front of the tent, in front of the tent, was bigger than the old one at the tabernacle. So what are they doing with all these utensils? See, I think they're storing them. And remember, they built rooms off to the sides of the temple where priests could live, or that might be their headquarters when they're serving or whatever. I don't know. But look at some of the dimensions. The courtyards, and they had a courtyard of the Gentiles, and they had all that stuff.
Didn't they have each tribe or surrounding it too?
Well, not at Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, they were in the Promised Land, and in the Promised Land, they were all in their allotted territory, the land that He had given them. When they were traveling around the tabernacle, they did that. Now, so they got it in there, and it happened when the priest came from the holy place, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, just like when the tabernacle was finished, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud. That's the glory cloud. That's what the scholars call the Shekinah cloud. That's the cloud that was representative by the pillar of fire that led them at night, and the cloud that led them in the daytime when they were traveling through the wilderness. And when they would set up the tent of the Lord, by the way, He dwells in that tent. That's His tent. So when they finished the temple, He comes that's his house. Solomon built a house for God.
So you think it's a literal cloud?
I think it's something seeable.
I mean, like the cloud.
Glory. No, I think it's like smoke that. Yeah. A mist, yeah. I totally missed that too. but yeah. Sorry. Unintended.
They described it as like a white cloud flying there.
So they couldn't go in there because of the holiness of God. Now, Solomon then dedicates, he makes this speech. The Lord has said he would dwell in thick cloud, and I've surely built you a lofty house, a place for your dwelling forever. The king faced about and blessed all the assembly of Israel. While the assembly was standing, he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who spoke with his mouth to my father David and has fulfilled it with his hand, saying, Since the day that I brought my people from Egypt, I did not choose a city out of all the tribes of Israel in which to build a house that my name might be there. I did not choose Jerusalem. But I chose David to be over my people Israel. I chose David to be king. I didn't choose Jerusalem, I chose David. Now it was in the heart of my father David to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said, because it was in your heart to build a house, you did well, it was in your heart. Nonetheless, you shall not build a house, but your son, who will be born to you, he will build the house for my name. And of course, that reference, we always reference back to 2 Solomon, or to Samuel, when Nathan confronted David for the adultery with Bathsheba, and he promises that his son would build a house. The priest says that was Solomon, folks. Solomon says that was him, and the priest records it. The Lord has fulfilled the word which he spoke, and I want y'all to hear, there's a statement he's going to make in a minute that's, I think, important for the understanding of the Old Testament. He has fulfilled the word which he spoke, for I have risen and placed on my father David and sit on the throne of Israel as the Lord promised, and have built the house for the name of the Lord. So Solomon said, he has fulfilled it in me. Now we know, we're looking messianically, but Solomon is figurative, folks. I believe he's figurative, typical. Just like all the kings were, by the way. There's another story there. But Solomon said, I have set a place for the ark in which is the covenant of the Lord. See, that's the two tablets of stone. The ark of the covenant was the place where the two tablets of stone were. Which is interesting, by the way, when we read things like if the ministry of death in letters engraved on stone came with glory, so that the sons of Israel could not look intently at the face of Moses because of the glory of his face fading as it was. So, what was that engraved on stone? The Ten Commandments. And what did we call it? And what did Paul call it?
The
ministry of death.
Wow.
Now, is he talking about the Ten Commandments, or is he talking about the covenant?
He's talking about the covenant. That's what God.
And that's exactly what he's talking about. Because the comparison is, in 2 Corinthians 3, we are ministers of the new covenant, which is not of the letter, but of the Spirit. So 2 Corinthians 3 is talking about the covenants, the old and the new. And at the end of chapter 3, he gives that thing about Moses putting the cover over his face so they wouldn't see it fading away. He didn't put a cover on his face so they could not see the brightness of it. He put a cover over his face so they couldn't see the brightness fading away, which is representative of the covenant fading away.
And is it because they couldn't keep the Ten Commandments as a ministry of death?
Exactly.
Every time they didn't do it, they
Notice that Solomon is going to say, by the way, if you'll keep my commandments, I'll bless you. If when you don't, I won't. And then, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Notice the times he says to pray and the things he says to pray for. 7 things that he'll talk about that they're supposed to pray. And the last one is probably the most important. Well, maybe not, but, in terms of. So Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in the presence of the assembly, spread out his hand toward heaven, and said, O Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven or on earth beneath, keeping covenant, showing loving kindness to your servants who walk before you with all their heart, who have kept with your servant my father David that which you have promised to him. Indeed, you have spoken with your mouth and fulfilled it with your hand, as it is this day. It's impossible for God to lie. He always keeps his word. Now therefore, O Lord, the God of Israel, keep with your servant David, my father, that which you have promised him, saying, you shall not lack for a man to sit on the throne of Israel. If only your sons take heed to the way you walk before me as you have walked. Now, we're going to get to chapter 12, y'all, sooner or later. Chapter 11, chapter 11, 12. And the kingdom is going to be divided. And Judah, of course, will be the place where David's descendants sit on the throne. Israel will be taken over. And then when Judah's carried away, where's the king? And later on in Kings, we'll get there where Jeconiah, which was the last two, and he'll say, write this man childless. No descendant to sit on the throne.
Because they didn't walk.
And it wasn't that he was childless. It wasn't that he wouldn't have a child. It was that his descendants ain't going to sit on the throne of David. None of his descendants are. So we end that physical line of Solomon on the throne. Isn't that interesting? And we look forward to the son of Nathan, the son of David.
Yes.
So, now therefore let your word, I pray, be confirmed which you have spoken to my father David. But then notice what he says. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house which I've built, this dinky little thing. And by the way, how long did it take Solomon to build God's house?
30-something years, 40 years.
7 years.
Oh.
How long did it take him to build his house? His own. 13 years. How much bigger was Solomon's house than the temple?
Probably a whole lot bigger.
A whole lot bigger. Well,
Especially if he had
things to learn, folks, some things to think about and make contrast with people and things. Solomon was a rascal. So he says, and we start getting this the times of prayer. This is what we just. Yet have regard to the prayer of your servant and supplication. Listen to the cry which your servant prays before you today, so that your eyes may be open toward this house night and day. Solomon was saying, I know this house is not big enough to contain you. I know that you promised to put your name there. So when people pray toward this house, that's when you look at it. You look at it with favor. You look at it with your covenant eyes, as it were. The place which you have said my name shall be there. So listen to the prayer of your servant which you have prayed toward this place. Listen to the supplication of your servant and your people when they pray toward this place, and here in heaven, your dwelling place, and hear and forgive. So Solomon understood that God didn't literally live in that temple. So here we go.
So that's where the Muslims got to putting the rug down and praying
it from the Israelites.
From Daniel in captivity, and we'll talk about that down here. But Daniel, 3 times a day, went to the window facing Jerusalem and got down and prayed to God toward Jerusalem. Now, keep that in mind. I got ahead of myself because when we get to the 7th prayer down here, we'll talk about that. But if a man sins against his neighbor and is made to take an oath, and he comes and takes an oath before your house, then hear in heaven and act and judge your servants, condemning the wicked by bringing his way on his own head, and justifying the righteous by giving him according to his righteousness. So judge between the man and his neighbor, the man who comes to bring his judgment before the Lord. Then you show who's the righteous person and who's the unrighteous person. When your people are defeated before an enemy because they've sinned against you, if they turn again to you and confess your name and pray and make supplication to you in this house, then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of the people and bring them back to the land you gave their fathers. When the heavens are shut up and there's no rain, so we get the fasting, and they'll pray toward this place and confess your name and turn from their sin. And the implications are that God has shut up the heaven and there's no rain because he's punishing them. So forgive them, teach them your way, send rain. If there's a famine in the land, and pestilence, or blight, or locusts, and whatever prayer is made by them, and he's knowing the affliction of his own heart and spreading his hands toward heaven. And see, I like that one. That's interesting. So, might there be individual sins that they're having to deal with instead of national? Supplication is made by man and all your people, each knowing the affliction of his own heart and spreading toward this. I'm just raising the question. That's what I saw. Makes me think. Then hear in heaven and forgive and act and render according to your ways, whose heart you know, for you alone know the hearts of the sons of men. Now, also the foreigner who is not of your people, when he comes from a far country for your name's sake, so the proselyte, they will hear of your great name and your mighty hand and outstretched arm. When he comes and prays toward this house, hear in heaven your dwelling place, and do according to all which the foreigner calls to you. Now, would the Jews think that had to be a proselyte? Probably. And not just a, or would they understand that God would deal with both Jews and Gentiles? And I think probably proselyte, I think they'd have to say, these people are coming to be a proselyte so we can accept them. If they're not going to proselyte to the Jewish religion, we're not going to accept them. I'm just thinking out loud, y'all. Do with it what you want to. But we get to 44. When your people go out to battle against their enemy by whatever way you'll send them, and they pray the Lord toward the city, which you have chosen, then hear in heaven and maintain their cause. In other words, help them win the battle. When they sin against you, for there's no man who does not sin, and you're angry with them, and deliver them to an enemy so that they take them away captive. Here we go. If they take thought in the land where they have been taken captive, and repent and make supplication to you in the land of those who have taken them captive. So they're far away in the captive land. Saying, we have sinned and committed iniquity and acted wickedly. If they return to you with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their enemies who have taken them captive, and pray to you toward their land which you have given to their fathers, the city which you have chosen, and the house which I have built for your name, then hear their prayer and their supplication in heaven, in your dwelling place, and maintain their cause and forgive, etc. Now see, that's what Daniel did. See, Daniel is an illustration of that. So where would we pray if we were going to pray before Jerusalem? Where would we look? When Solomon finished praying the entire prayer and supplication, he arose from before the altar of the Lord, from kneeling on his knees with his hands spread toward heaven. He stood and blessed all the assembly of Israel with a loud voice, saying, and listen to this, folks. Blessed be the Lord who has given what? Rest to his people Israel. Now, you know what the Hebrew writer says in chapter 3 and 4? If Joshua could have given them rest, then rest would have been by the law, folks, in the land of Canaan. There remains a rest for the people of God, the Hebrew writer wrote, and when? What, AD 65, 66? So this is not spiritual rest, it's rest from the enemies, so was Solomon, but again, it is figurative. In Solomon, God gave them rest, but it's figurative of the rest in Messiah. The rest in Jesus. And it's interesting, by the way, in Revelation, is it 14:15 or somewhere there? Blessed is the dead who die in the Lord from henceforth the days of the Spirit, for they may rest from their labors. He wasn't talking about they get to rest because they're dead. Rest is found in Jesus, folks. And rest from their labors has to deal with the law, folks, not with... they got to live and go mop the church floor. It's not physical work. It's spiritual work. It's a contrast between the covenants. And see, we look at it literally, because the rest of the world looks at it literally. But notice what Solomon said. He has given rest to his people according to all that...
They do have to stop mopping the floor, though.
I know, that's right.
Say what? I didn't hear that.
No, you were saying it was talking about the rest will stop having to mop the floor. I said, but they do have to stop, don't they? Don't they have to stop mopping the floor?
They don't have to, they get to.
Okay.
They don't have to stop mopping the floor because they can't mop it anymore.
Okay.
But I was gonna ask you about I was expressing the way my grandmothers used to pray, and one used to pray on her knees.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, my mind goes also to, where did that come from? That, because back when, we would get on our knees.
Yeah.
And
Well, I hadn't been, I have a cousin who's devout Catholic. My brother now is practicing Catholic. And so his son and daughter-in-law. But they still have the
Yes.
kneeling
Yes.
things on the pews,
Yeah.
But my grandfather, when my grandfather prayed, when they asked him to lead prayer in the assembly, he was always sitting on the end of the bench. He always got down on one knee and lifted up his right hand to heaven and prayed. That was his thing.
And then Brother Cook used to
lift up his, yes, he always got on his knees to pray. But he got on his knees. He didn't just get on one knee. I mean, probably off and on, alternated. Because it was interesting. I would go over there, I would leave here after preaching and go over there and sneak in on the back row and sit. And he was, of course, always sitting in the amen corner, because he's going to preach with all the dignitaries of the church. And they all, because of Brother Cook's leadership. It wasn't because when he got down, when they were going to pray and he knelt down to pray, they all got down and knelt down to pray. The whole church didn't necessarily do that, but all the leaders did. And even if they were in between the pews, folks, they still got down on their knees because of Brother Cook's influence on them. But remember that Abraham prayed stretched out on the ground.
Right.
So position is not the thing, but still, it is prostrate. It is proskuneo, to bow down towards, and that has to be spiritually the case, regardless of what physical position you're in. But notice he says that he's done according to all he promised, and not one word has failed of all his good promise, which he promised through Moses his servant. Which means, by the way, that all the land promise was totally, completely, wholly fulfilled. God does not owe the children of Israel land today. He doesn't owe the nation of Israel land today. He kept his word and kept his promise. And he also kept his promise to take it away from them when they rebelled against him. But Solomon says, not one word has failed of all the good promises which he promised to Moses his servant. So that needs to be emphasized. Solomon through the Spirit. And by the way, in the spirit of the priest who wrote it and recorded it, preserved it. So may the Lord our God be with us as he was with our fathers, and may he not leave us or forsake us, that he may incline our hearts to himself, to walk in his ways and keep his commandments and statutes. And may these words of mine, which I have made supplication before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may maintain the cause of the servants and the cause of the people as each day requires, so that all the people of the earth may know that the Lord is God, and there is no one else. So let your heart therefore be wholly devoted to the Lord our God, to walk in his statutes, to keep his commandments, as at this day. So the temple is dedicated, they offer the sacrifices, and boy, don't you know it smelled in Jerusalem.
Barbecue.
All that blood, all that shedding of blood, 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep, offered the burnt offerings and the grain offerings and the fat of the peace offerings. For the bronze altar that was before the Lord was too small to hold the burnt offering and grain offering and fat.
That was Solomon's offer by himself,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
that's his leadership. Yeah, that's his leadership of the. See, the nation of Israel is participating in all this. At least the heads of the tribes and the males who had be there for the feast. So Solomon observed the feast at that time, and all Israel with him, a great assembly from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt. So again, the land. And the feast is probably the Feast of Tabernacles, y'all. The Feast of Weeks, and I think, no, that's not it. Maybe it was, I was looking. Anyway, 2 Chronicles, whatever feast it is, it's the feast that takes place in the 7th month. So look up the feast. That's the Feast of Tabernacles. But I think 2 Chronicles will tell you that. But notice this, and I have a question for you folks. So they observed 7 days.
14.
And 7 more days. And so, what, Saturday? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. And then he says, and on the 8th day, he sent the people away, and they blessed the king. They went to their tents joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness the Lord has shown to David his servant and to Israel the people. And that's another interesting. Why didn't he say to Solomon? Because it's the Davidic promise of the kingdom. David is the one through whom the king promise comes. Now, y'all, we're not going to get through chapter 9. We got 8 minutes. We were supposed to do chapter 8 and chapter 9 today, so we're not going to get through chapter 9. Y'all want to stop there and start at 9 next week? Let's just do that. Let's just stop there and start at 9 next week. Because this is a big part of the relationship of Solomon and God, the communication. So we'll do that.